First, I'd note that the petty game about who from the Department of Homeland Security testifies today must be amazing to Americans outside the Beltway. This is the annual hearing on worldwide threats to the homeland, and I can't, for one, imagine setting aside that priority in order to engage in a snit with the Department about whether Mr. Wolf or Mr. Cuccinelli appears. So we have neither. And in light of that, I'll direct questions, Director Ray, to you. All summer and early fall, of course, we've seen numerous and ongoing riots, looting, property destruction, even serious injuries and killings in cities across the United States. Minneapolis, LA, Seattle, Charleston, Chicago, St. Louis, Washington, D.C., Rochester, Lancaster, and of course, Portland come to mind. And we've seen some media characterize these events as fiery but mostly peaceful, and politicians have dismissed them occasionally as myth. But Americans have seen independent reports and shocking videos, and they keep coming. I don't really understand the thinking of lawmakers who seek perversely to justify this criminality by pointing to the existence of other violent extremists with different ideology. I would think all elected officials would condemn violence regardless of the ideology of the perpetrators, and perhaps especially for ideologies closer to their position on the spectrum. But indeed, as Ms. Lesko pointed out earlier, the characterization of right and left in these things is pretty hard to pin down. In any event, some of these reports, even early on, have suggested that there were pallets of brick pre-positioned in riot areas. We've seen reports of vehicles on scene to facilitate or supply rioters, coordination of activity via social media you made reference to earlier, and interstate travel of rioters to multiple venues. All of these, in turn, suggest a funding source or multiple funding sources. You have made reference, as has the Attorney General, to numerous arrests having been made. Are you investigating sources of funding in support of that criminal activity?
I appreciate the question. And certainly we have a number of investigations and are pursuing a number of leads that do things like try to identify networks, travelers, supply sources. We look at repeat offenders. As I mentioned, I think in response to a question from one of your colleagues, one of the things that's been so challenging about this is that an awful lot of the coordination, or whether it's coordination or organization, if you will, that occurs is happening kind of on the ground, you know, in the dark, on the streets, at a tactical level, as opposed to kind of on a more structured or coordinated national level, and that makes it that much harder to investigate and disrupt. But I think it's important for people to understand that although I do agree that the majority of the people out there protesting in general across the country are peaceful protesters, there's no question that the biggest number is peaceful protesters. That should not diminish, which I think is the point you're making, from the fact that even though it might numerically be a smaller group, that's very dangerous activity that smaller group is engaged in. And that's why the FBI is focused, much as your question was, we're focused on the violence, not the ideology. We don't really care left, right. Violence is wrong. We're going after the violence. We don't care what motivates them.
To be sure, those issues ought to be irrelevant to this committee or to any law enforcement agency in the United States. That is to say, what ideology someone has or their First Amendment activity. And to say, so that much of that happening is frankly something that we should take no cognizance of. But as to those people who are engaging in violence and destruction, and there have been many, the question becomes, with its proliferation in so many places, is the FBI examining the finances underlying the people who you arrest to see what their Venmo accounts say, to see what the sources of cash are that come to them that they're buying their supplies with and their fireworks that they fire at law enforcement officers? And are you using civil forfeiture laws to disrupt those sources of funding and the like?
Well, without reference to any specific investigation, I can tell you that there are any number of investigations in which the source of funding, the source of supply, are things that are of particular interest and the things that we're actively questioning and pursuing leads on. As far as the civil forfeiture piece, I will confess that sitting here right now in the hearing, I can't off the top of my head think of a situation where we've yet been able to use that, but we will use every tool in our toolbox if we think it fits.
My time's expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the young lady from New York for 5 minutes, Ms. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller,